We know that as people age, that they're also less likely to commit crimes. The largest number of offenses are committed by people under the age of 35. People over the age of 40, no matter what their sex, race, or ethnicity, or socioeconomic class level, are less likely to commit crimes. This is reflected also in our prison population. There's also a disparity in the race and ethnicity of people in prison, and minorities are overrepresented. This does not mean that these groups necessarily commit more offenses, but that they're more likely to be convicted and sentenced to prison if they're charged with an offense. Criminal justice studies indicate that there's inherent bias in the discretionary points in the criminal justice process, and that this bias cumulatively disadvantages minorities so that they're more likely to be charged, convicted, and have longer sentences or to be denied probation. This then operates to increase the number of racial and ethnic minorities that are in prison. Our prison population is overwhelmingly male, and people who are not married are more likely to serve a prison sentence. We do know that for young people, in other words, ages 20 to 26, two factors tend to lower their involvement in crime. One is stable employment, and the other is being in a stable relationship. Thus, being married to some extent is what's known as a protective factor against crime, meaning that once married, one is less likely to engage in criminal activity. And I stress that the relationship itself does not prevent the criminal activity, just that there's a correlation between the crime and the lack of stable relationships in one's life. Education is also a protective factor against crime and incarceration. If a person does not have a high school diploma, then they're 2.5 times more likely to be in prison. College graduates are the least likely to be in prison. The concept of recidivism is critical to understand. This refers to the likelihood of whether someone who is released from custody engages in another offense and returns to prison. This graph shows the likelihood of someone being rearrested and returning to prison within 5 years of the original release. Certain crimes are more likely to be committed repeatedly and contribute more to the recidivism rate. You can see that car theft is more likely to occur again after a person is released from prison. Murder is much less likely to occur, as is drunk driving or sex crime. What can you discern from this chart about certain kinds of property crimes, such as car theft, burglary, or robbery? Why do you think the rates are different? This chart shows the difference in policies regarding the death penalty and the number of executions state by state since the death penalty was restored in 1977. Why do you think that certain states execute many more people? For instance, look at the difference between Texas and Colorado, or Washington and Virginia. Is the crime rate really that different? Or is the public reaction to violent crime different? What other factors might play out in whether the death penalty imposed or not? Resources available to the defense team, or attitudes by prosecutors? Just ponder that for a minute. Finally, let's conclude thinking about the public's reaction to deviance. The United States approach is to marginalize many deviant groups and then push them to the periphery of society. Thus, the U.S. does a particularly poor job providing for mental health overall in our country, and the poor receive little to no assistance. We punish certain groups of criminals harshly. Street crime is punished with long sentences under get-tough policies, while white-collar criminals often are not prosecuted or just get a slap on the wrist. That concludes our chapter on deviance. We've considered what societies deem to be deviance and why this is a social construct. We've considered how societies sanction deviant behavior And we've touched on the sociological, the psychological, and the sociobiological explanations for deviance. We also discussed how theories would explain deviance and considered the criminal justice system and how it deals with it. Our next chapter is going to be considering the concept of global stratification.